it's Christy. Welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be making a card using Lawn Fawn's Merry Mice, Happy Harvest, Absolutely Awesome, Jump for Joy, You Autumn Know, and You Goat This. So I've stamped the images I'll be using on Catherine Pooler Favorite White cardstock with Lawn Fawn Jet Black ink, and I'll be coloring with my Copic markers. I'm going to begin with my mice, and I decided to use some brown shades for them today. I'll be using E30, E31, E33, E35, and E37. Starting with that E37 and laying in my shadows on the back of their body, the back of the head, the base of the ears, the underside of the arms, the back of the hindquarters. And I'm going to do all three of them at once, just since they're really small and relatively close together, so it's quick to blend. Then I'll switch to the E35. I had my marker caps out of order there for a second, but I just fixed those, and I'm going to blend out the edge of that E37. I want to create kind of like a rounded shape, almost like a half of a heart shape around the face. So I'm laying that in now, and then just making sure to go over the edge of that E37 and pull it along with me into this mid-tone so that it's not leaving behind any kind of harsh lines. Once I have that E35 laid in, I'm going to come in with the E33, and I'm going to fill in most of the mice with that. I still will leave a little bit of space on the face where I wanted that to be lighter, and of course the bellies. But other than that, I am going to fill in the ears, the arms, the legs, lower part underneath the belly. All of that I'm going to fill in with that E33. And then once I've done that, I'll come in with the E31 and I'll bring that even closer onto the face and add a little bit of shading to the belly. I'll do that for all three of them. I also added a little bit of that to the inner part of the ear. And then I'm going to blend that out with the E30, but I will leave just a tiny little bit of white space on each of those areas to have an extra tiny bit of highlight. And by the way, if you are looking for other ways to color mice, I do have a video on 8 ways to color mice that has different colors, patterns, textures, and that is in my Ways to Color Critters playlist. I'm also going to use the lightest 3 shades here for my Scarecrow's face. I wanted that to look like it was maybe made out of a burlap bag. Then I'm going to switch to some more desaturated browns. These have a bit more of a gray tone to them. I'm going to use E43, E44, and E47. And I will use that for the center of my sunflowers. I also have a larger one that I'm coloring off to the side, and I'll do the post that my Scarecrow is attached to, and I will also do the apple barrel. And I'm just going to do the apple barrel all in these shades. Sometimes I do the horizontal slats to look like metal, but today I just decided to have it all be wood. I didn't want to bring any black into this card. So I will use all 3 of those shades on that as well, just coloring in the individual slats so it gives it a nice little bit of texture there, and coloring from darkest to lightest as always. So I wanted to get the neutrals out of the way first, and now I can start bringing in some color. I'm going to be doing another fall rainbow card, but this one will have a different color palette than the first one that I did a little bit ago. So I'm going to bring in pink to start, and I'm going to use that to give my mice some rosy cheeks, color in their noses and the insides of their ears. I used R11, R20, and R22 for that. I really like how that color looks with their nice rich brown fur. Then I'm going to keep that R20 and R22, and I'll add in R24 and R29. And I'm also going to bring in YG11 and YG17. I'm going to color my apples with all of these shades. I want to have a little green spot on each of them. So I'm starting with that YG17 and adding a bit of that, and then blending out with the YG11, which is super light, so it's going to blend really well with that softest pink shade. And then I'll color the rest of these apples with those reds, starting with the R29. And I'm trying to place that red as far away from the green as possible. And then I'll slowly kind of eat my way toward that green with the lighter shades. So I added the R24 next, and then the R22. And if you wanted just solid red apples, you could just leave it at those 3 shades. But I like throwing that little bit of green in there, and having that R20 just helps transition between that green and the red. And I really like how that turned out. Next, I'm going to switch to oranges, and I'm going to use some rusty shades. I'm using YR12, YR14, and YR18, and I'm going to do my pumpkins in these tones. On the last card, I also had pumpkins, and I did use this shade for some of them, and then I switched to a brighter orange to have those stand out. I will also bring that brighter orange in for something else on today's card, and because of that, I decided to just do the pumpkins all the same. So I'm starting with that YR18, and I'm adding a little bit of depth where those lines are drawn so that it looks indented there. And then the highlight is going to go on the area that is popped out the most, because that is where the sun would reflect and you would get that highlight. So once I have that YR18 laid in, I blend it out with the YR14. And then I'm going to come in with that YR12 and just fill everything that is still white in with that. And then I'm going to switch to that brighter orange like I mentioned, but I'm going to use that for my Scarecrow's shirt. And I'm going to use YR02, YR04, and YR07. So I'll take that YR07 and lay that in down at the underside of those long outstretched arms, and also at the bib of his overalls. And then I'll blend up with that YR04 and fill in with the YR02. I wanted to add a pattern to this shirt, so I'm going to let that dry for about 30 seconds to a minute. And then I'm going to come in with a darker orange. I'm going to use YR09, and I'll lay in some stripes going vertically first, and then I'll come in and add some horizontally as well. Just being really careful to use the very tip of that marker so I get those nice thin little strokes, and making sure that the lines kind of meet up the whole way across. And then I'll add some extra to the chest area. And then I also wanted to add in some darker stripes, so I pulled in E19, and that provided just the right amount of contrast. I was really loving how it was turning out, and then this marker decided to leak on me. I don't think this marker has ever done that to me before, but I guess today was the day, and it just released so much ink, and it was such a dark color that I did try to blot it up first with a tissue that I had sitting next to me, and then I did try to fix it. This has happened to me in videos before. It's not very often that it happens, but occasionally it does. And usually I do try to fix the image, and you can never tell at the end. But this was such a dark color, and I was working at it, and I probably could have gotten it to fix if I had put enough effort into it, just using that colorless blender and then taking it back down to white and then coloring over it. But I realized it was going to take so much time that I might as well just recolor the image. I wasn't that far into it anyway, so that's what I'm going to do. For now, I'm going to move on to yellow, and I'm using Y13, YR21, and YR24. I really love this combo for sunflowers, and I really thought that it would work well for that hay bale as well. That YR24 and the YR21 add such a nice, rich golden tone to the combo, and then that Y13 just really brightens everything up. And to get these shades to blend well in this particular combo, since they aren't a natural fit, I actually color completely over that YR21 with the Y13 just to help everything kind of meld together. And it just works. I really, really love it. If I were to color like gold coins or anything else that I really wanted to be gold, I would use this combo for that as well. I also colored my grasses with these shades, and then I'm going to switch to some yellow greens. I'm using YG01, YG03, and YG05 for my leaves on my apples. I did squeeze all three of those shades in, and then I also have a panel off to the side that has a couple more leaves for the sunflowers, and I used that combo for that. And then I'm going to move on to an olive green. I'm going to use YG93, YG95, and YG97 for my pumpkin stems. And then I'm also going to use these for my Scarecrow's hat. So you can see that I just recolored what I had already done on the first panel. I also gave him a little red hat brim, which I forgot to color when I had my reds out. So I just went ahead and did that. And then I am just emphasizing that crease in the center by adding an extra bit of shadow there with that YG97, and then blending out with the YG95 and using that YG93 for a highlight. Then I'm going to switch to kind of like a desaturated turquoise combo. I'm using BG10 with BG53 and BG57. Again, I didn't want to do the exact same kind of fall rainbow that I had done on that previous card, so I thought adding in the turquoise would be a fun touch. It's going to be like a more expansive rainbow, just has a few extra shades in there. And so I am using that for my wagon. I think that those turquoise blues look so nice with the oranges of the wagon. So it was just a natural pairing for that since they're opposites on the color wheel. I'm going to give my Scarecrow some denim overalls. So I'm going to use B95, B97, and B99 for that. I'm going to use that B99 first and lay in some shadows where the seams would be, also on the top of the straps since his head would be casting a shadow there, and on the bottom of the pocket. And then I'll start blending out with the B95 for a mid-tone. I'll also add that above the pocket so that that pocket looks kind of pushed out once we add the highlight to it. And then I'll fill everything in with that B95. And I'm just coloring in little circular motions to break up the previous color and get everything nice and smooth. And then for my purple, I went with some more desaturated violet shades. I'm using V93, V95, and V99. And I'm going to do all of my fallen leaves in these purple shades. I thought that would be something a little bit different, like they all came from the same tree. I don't know what kind of trees have purple leaves, but there are definitely some in my area that I think they might be a kind of maple. I'm not really sure, but they definitely do have purple leaves, and so I just was kind of drawing from that. My B93 ended up being too dried out, so I definitely need to have a Copic refill day soon. I know I've got a couple set aside that desperately need refills, but I just used the B91 instead and then trimmed all of these images out with their matching dyes. For my background, I've taken a piece of Bristol smooth surface cardstock and trimmed that down with the largest of the small stitch rounded rectangle stackables from Lawn Fawn. and I am going to do a cloudy sky. So I'm using the cloudy stencil and some Salvage Patina Distress Oxide ink. This is my favorite color for skies, and I think it goes really well with the wagon with the pumpkins in it. And since that will be down toward the lower part of the card, I like having that kind of accented toward the top of the card again to just pull your eye around the scene. So I'm going to do a few of these cloud formations, just adding a bit of color on there, pressing down more firmly as I leave the stencil, and then lifting up as I go higher so it gets that kind of soft, dreamy look. I added a little bit of color to those lower clouds, and then I'm going to bring in the Slimline Grassy stencil. I'll add that down at the bottom and bring in some Rustic Wilderness Distress Oxide ink. And I am going to blend that down. I'm pressing firmly but carefully at the top of that stencil so I get those grasses, but I don't want to bend up that stencil because it is kind of fine detail. And then I'll just kind of smooth that out as I get lower and lower on the panel. So I will add a little bit more ink and just keep blending until that is smoothed out how I like it. And then I will press a little bit of that Salvage Patina Distress Oxide ink onto an acrylic block. I'm going to add a bit of water to that to mix it up and make it more fluid. And then I'll tap that just over the sky portion to give it an extra bit of interest. Once I like how that's looking, I'll set this panel aside to dry. Once it has dried completely, I will pop it in my MISTI so I can stamp a sentiment. I'm going to use the Pick of the Patch add-on. I'll show you that in just a second. I'm going to use the tiny little happy fall sentiment. It's going to be a nice full scene, so I wanted a smaller size sentiment, but something that was still nice and bold. And I stamped that using VersaFine Onyx Black ink. There is that stamp set. And then I'm also going to do a insert for the inside of my card. So I just use that same die to cut down another piece of white cardstock. And I'm going to stamp some images and a sentiment from Happy Harvest using walnut ink. And it says, "You are amazing," to go with the little corn stalk there. And then I'm going to add a couple of crows to this as well. I love those crows from Happy Harvest. They are some of my favorite Lawn Fawn images for fall. I just adore them. So I added those, and then I am going to use some pattern paper. So these actually came in my most recent Lawn Fawn order. I had a couple of these that are from one of the previous fall sets. I'll have it linked down below. I think it's Favorite Flannel Fall, but for sure I'll have it linked down below. And these are the full size sheets, so the scale of the patterns is much bigger than the 6x6, but I really love the fall leaves and the plaid on the back. So I just flipped the green one over and layered those onto my card base. And then I'm going to bring in my focal panel and I will glue that to my card base as well. I usually do pop up my focal panel, but today I wanted to pop up some of my images, and I typically only like to use one level of foam tape on my cards because I do mail a lot of these out, and I also sell a lot of cards, and so I don't want people to have to pay extra for postage. And keeping it to one layer, I usually am pretty good with just a regular stamp. So that's what I decided to do, and I'm also going to glue that insert to the inside of my card, and it'll have that nice same little bit of frame there with that brown cardstock showing around the edges. Just makes it look nice and polished. So now I'm ready to start adhering those images, and I am going to be using a mix of foam tape and liquid glue so we can create some dimension on this card. So I've got my Scarecrow popped up with foam tape, but I've not peeled off the release paper yet because I want to be able to use him as a placeholder to get my corn stalks positioned correctly. One of these was stamped with Noble Fir, the darker one, and the other one was stamped with jalapeno ink. And so I'm going to have those corn stalks off to the right hand side, and on the left I'm going to have some sunflowers. So I wanted this to be kind of like a little bit of everything fall scene, outdoorsy, you know, fall field type scene. So we've got the corn, we've got the sunflowers, we've got pumpkins, we've got hay bales, we've got apples. Everything you can think of that is quintessentially fall, I wanted to have in this card, even the colored leaves. So I just spent some time rearranging those sunflowers how I wanted them. And then I've got those leaves from the You Autumn Know stamp set. They actually are quite perfectly sized for these sunflowers. So I'm going to add those just tucked underneath. Again, just using plain liquid glue for all of those items. And then I'll, of course, have that scarecrow popped up over top. So I'm just making sure that I have everything how I want it before I commit. And then I can go ahead and peel up those release papers and I'll stick him down firmly into place. Just making sure that he is straight and dead center on that card. I really wanted him to be like the anchor of the scene. Everything else is kind of based and arranged around him. So I needed him to be nice and straight on that card. Once I'm happy with how he's looking, I can begin to add in the elements that are going to fill the bottom of the scene, beginning with this pumpkin wagon. That is going to go on the left hand side, and then a little bit above that I'm going to add that hay bale, just making sure I have that at the level that I want it before I press that foam tape down and commit. And then just below that I'm going to add the apple basket. So again, I'm using some foam tape except for the areas that are going over anything that's already popped up with foam tape. And you'll notice that I also like adding color in like opposite crosswise directions. So like I said earlier, we've got that kind of turquoisey blue in the sky and then down at the bottom with the wagon, but we've also got the yellow of the sunflowers over on the upper left, and then we've got the hay bale down toward the lower right. We've got the apple barrel over on the more lower right, but then we also have it echoed even lower on the left with the little mouse that's holding the apple, and up high with that red hat brim. And now I'm going to add a little pop of orange down over across from the pumpkins by adding that tiny little pumpkin there. And then of course that is echoed in his shirt as well. So it's just something that I like to do. I like to pull the colors around the scene and really fill it in and cause your eye to kind of move around the scene and just take everything in. I'm going to have one of those little merry mice standing on top of the hay bale because my concept for this card was that these two little mice from Merry Mice are actually building this scarecrow. So I'm going to tuck those grasses in his hand so that they look like straw, like he's stuffing that scarecrow. And then the other little mouse is going to be standing up on his arm, making sure his hat is on straight, and also tucking a little fallen leaf into that hat brim to give him an extra little pop of color. So I'm taking the rest of those fallen leaves and just tucking them around the scene. And then I also had another little bit of that grass that I'm using as hay. I decided to tuck that back behind the mouse as if he's kind of pulling it out of that hay bale and using it to stuff the scarecrow while also using it as a stool. So I just added that there. And then I've got one more leaf that I'm going to add into the sky, kind of blowing in the wind up toward the top left there. And then all that's left is to add a little bit of sparkle. I'm going to use my favorite Stardust Stickles and I'll add it to all of those purple leaves. But of course I couldn't stop myself there, so I decided to also add it to my sunflowers and my apples, just giving those a little bit of shine. And I'm going to stop myself there before I go completely out of control. But that finishes off this card. I'll lift it up to the camera so you can see it in a bit more detail, give you another peek at the inside. I really hope you guys enjoyed this one. I had so much fun with this card. I love fall, even though I'm such a summer girly. My birthday's in the fall, and I do love the season. I just wish it lasted longer where I live. It's so short here, but can last forever on a card, right? So if you enjoyed this one, please be sure to hit that like button. Leave me a comment down below. Subscribe if you haven't. Ring that notification bell. All of the products I use will be listed and linked in the description bar below. And here are 2 extra videos I thought you might also enjoy. You can click on either one to check them out. Thanks so much for spending your time with me today. I hope you had a good one, and I'll see you soon in the next. Bye-bye.